When Eli moved to Guam to finish his doctoral research, he declined the gloomy biological station run by his university and instead rented a room in a ramshackle house from a woman named Carol. The house was painted a cheery yellow-orange, and wind chimes made of beach glass hung from the eaves. Carol's accent was vaguely Australian, but when Eli asked where she was from, she merely said, "Oh, here and there." Deep lines traversed her face, and her body had the wiriness of an aging marathoner, but her blonde hair still held the deep sheen. She smiled warmly for everyone, but her eyes were always darting, jumping from one person to the next. Her tenants never stayed long, presumably because they were transients, backpackers, temp researchers like Eli, but the real reason was that she could read minds, which is not a desirable quality in a landlady. Carol rented every room in her house, and she rented the back porch too, to a bedraggled man named Linus, who supposedly ran an online pawn shop. He sat out there all day long, his extension cord snaking back into the living room. He showered in the middle of the night. When he needed to take a piss, he would just lumber to the edge of the porch. Sometimes no one saw him for days. Eli returned home each day sweaty, covered in cuts and scrapes, from stalking the endangered Micronesian kingfisher through the dense forests, a cheeky little bird that would perch on branches just above the reach of Eli's net and would look down on him, tittering. Sometimes two of them would crowd together on tree limbs, grooming each other's bright yellow feathers with their oversized beaks. He often wished he had a tranquilizer gun, but the practice was forbidden by his committee. He often complained to the other renters about the crackerjack birds, how he hadn't been able to capture a single one. He was supposed to be putting foot tags on 3 birds per day. Bummer, or that sucks, they would say, gulping down their beers. His housemates were sunburned and too skinny like him, and doused in a tang of sweat, ganja, and insect repellent. He would hang out with them for a couple nights, swap some stories, but they always left hastily, scrawling their email addresses for him on napkins for him to find in the morning. He wondered why they departed so quickly. Carol spent every day packing boxes, slowly and methodically. She was moving to the mainland, she said. She had friends there who would take her in, who had connections to jobs. On his day off, sometimes Eli would help her get the heavy things off the top shelves. She lovingly wrapped every chipped coffee mug, every flimsy wine bottle opener, in tissue and placed them in boxes. The living room was always littered with cardboard. One night, Eli came home after trudging through the brush after dark. The wet air draped around him and his clothes clung to his thin frame. He felt clammy and feverish. He entered the dark house and noticed a single kerosene lamp flickering in the kitchen. Carol was unpacking her boxes, undoing her work of the day, shuffling back and forth, placing her knickknacks back on the shelves so gently that no sound escaped. He tiptoed behind her, hoping she wouldn't notice him. She was like Penelope, he thought, unraveling tapestry every night in secret to stave off suitors and stall time. He wondered if she was waiting for an Odysseus. Homer, huh? How original, she said sharply without turning around. Eli hurried into his bedroom. The next morning, he emerged from his room and the house was silent. The sky was an odd hue of bluish gray. The door to the back porch rattled, as it couldn't be secured all the way because of Linus's extension cords. Eli heard a chirp and then another. They had a ragged timbre and urgency to them. He cautiously stepped out onto the back porch. The humid wind whipped through his unruly hair. Linus wasn't there, but his tarp was laid neatly over his lawn chair, laptop, and grubby sleeping bag. The chirps got louder, originating from the corner of the porch. He turned to look and saw a wrought iron burn cage, and in it 10 kingfishers, more than he'd ever seen in one place. They fluttered anxiously, jumping from perch to perch. This was an offering from Carol, or perhaps an apology. A packet of foot tags was placed next to the cage. He carefully unwrapped the foot tags, opened the cage door, and caught a hold of a kingfisher. The bird easily submitted. Eli stretched out its leg to fit a tag and noticed its fragile throat heaving in and out. It knew its own captivity. Without knowing what he was doing, he hoisted the cage up on the ledge and let the birds go. He watched them scatter through the forest below. Eli left that morning, leaving nothing but the check for his remaining rent. He spent the rest of his time in a standard issue bunk at the biostation. He often thought of his former landlady, the lonely psychic, and her revolving crew of tenants, driven away by her unsettlingly sage gestures. Her fantasy of departure that will never come to pass, when what she wanted was for someone to convince her to stay. He finally started catching and tagging kingfishers, though he didn't meet the season's quota. He netted only 10, to be exact.